The wedding feast was ending, and the Alpha King had not looked at his bride once. Chrysara stood at the foot of the great stone table, her hands folded over the silver sash that marked her as consort, and counted the minutes since her husband had last lifted his eyes from his untouched plate. 412. She had begun counting when the second course was served, because counting was easier than feeling. Around them, the banquet hall of Ostermere glowed with a light that did not match the occasion. Every torch burned blue at its heart, a sickness color, the shade the old healers said appeared when a pack's bond line was unwell. The nobles pretended not to notice. The warriors pretended not to notice. The servants moved through the hall with the careful quiet of people walking through a room where someone was already dying. Her husband of 3 hours, Valor Thornweald, king of the northern reaches and last true-blood alpha of House Thornweald, sat slumped in his carved chair with one hand wrapped around the stem of a wine cup he had not drunk from. His face was the color of riverstone. His breath came slow and shallow. When he lifted his head, the movement was so careful it looked rehearsed. He had not spoken her name at the altar. He had signed the mating decree with a hand that trembled. And when the high witness had asked him to claim her before the assembled packs, he had looked past her shoulder, at some fixed point on the far wall, and said, "I accept the consort." Not I accept her. Not her name. The consort. As if she were a title. As if she were a chair. Chrysara had smiled anyway. She had been trained since she was 9 years old to smile through things that would have broken lesser omegas. And she was not, in fact, a lesser omega, though that was a truth no one in this hall suspected. A servant reached for her cup to refill it. She covered the rim with her palm and shook her head. She needed to remain clear-eyed tonight. Too many things were wrong, and each wrongness was a thread she could not yet pull. The first wrongness was the blue torches. The second was the regent. Lord Harwick Morven, the king's uncle and appointed regent during his majesty's long illness, stood behind Valor's chair like a second shadow. He had not moved from that position since the ceremony. His hand rested lightly, too lightly, on the back of the king's chair. And every time Valor drew breath, Harwick's fingers shifted a fraction, as if measuring. A man measuring a grave. The third wrongness was her own mark. Chrysara had been marked by Valor at the altar, a shallow bite at the curve of her throat, the ceremonial claiming every new consort received. It should have burned, or throbbed, or simply ached the way any fresh wound ached. Instead, it felt like nothing at all. A numb patch of skin, as if the bite had been made by a man who was no longer quite in his body. She touched the mark now, under the silver sash, and felt only cold. "My lady." The voice belonged to Maester Olwyn Drave, the old physician who had attended the king since before Chrysara was born. He had appeared at her elbow without sound, as physicians of long practice learn to do. His face was kind and deeply tired. "The king requests his chamber," he said quietly. "The journey has wearied him." She did not need to look at Valor to know he had not requested anything. She also did not need to ask who had requested it on his behalf. Lord Harwick's hand had shifted again, the smallest pressure on the back of the chair, and the physician had moved. "Of course," Chrysara said. "I will attend him." "My lady, that will not be necessary. The king's night attendants have been prepared for some time. The consummation. The consummation is to be witnessed formally in the 3rd week, when His Majesty's strength permits. Tonight, you are to rest in the East Wing." The East Wing. The chambers reserved for dowager aunts and visiting widows. Not the Queen's chambers. Not adjacent to the King's. "I see," Chrysara said. She did not see. But she knew enough to not say so in front of a man who had not chosen to look her in the eye when he delivered the message. 2 handmaidens she did not know approached to lead her away. As she turned from the table, Valor lifted his head. For the first time since the vows, his gaze found her. His eyes were not the color they should have been. She had studied the portraits of Thornweald kings in the royal gallery during the 3 days of her pre-wedding seclusion. Every generation of his line had eyes the pale wolf gold of sunlight on wheat. Valor's, she remembered from the miniature his envoy had brought her, had been the same. Tonight, his eyes were the flat, sightless gray of a stone at the bottom of a well. He opened his mouth. For one suspended moment, Cressera thought he was going to say something. A word. Her name. A warning. Anything. What came out was a single breath that shaped itself almost into a syllable, and then failed. Lord Harwick's hand moved again, firmer this time. "The king is overtired," he said, smooth as river water. "Escort the consort to her rooms." The handmaidens took her by the elbows. She let them, because a queen who resists her own attendants on her wedding night is a queen who invites a scandal. And a scandal on night 1 is a queen who will not last night 30. Her mother had taught her that. Her mother had taught her many things, before her mother had been quietly poisoned in the orchards of House Vismara 2 winters ago, a death the court had called an unfortunate choking. Cressara walked from the hall with her spine straight and her breathing even, and she did not look back at her husband even once, because looking back would have shown the hall what her face was doing. The east wing corridors were colder than the banquet hall. The handmaidens left her at a carved door of black ashwood and bowed and withdrew without speaking. Inside, a fire had been lit, a small meal laid out, a nightdress folded on the coverlet. Everything proper. Everything exactly wrong. She sat down on the edge of the bed and, for the first time since the ceremony, allowed herself to close her eyes. She was 23 years old. She had been sold into this marriage by her own father, who needed Thornweald gold to keep House Vismara from dissolving. She had been told the king was ill but recovering. She had been told the union would strengthen both houses and stabilize the northern reaches. She had been told that omegas of her rank did not marry for love and should not expect it, and she had nodded at the time because arguing was pointless. She had not been told that the king of Ostermere was being killed in slow inches by someone in his own house, but she knew it now. She had known it from the moment the blue torches lit, from the moment the regent's fingers had tightened on the chair, from the moment her ceremonial mark had gone cold instead of warm. She had also not been told something else, something that was not in the marriage treaty, not in any court record, not in any line of her betrothal contract. Cressara was not an ordinary Omega. She had known this since she was 11 years old and had laid her hands on a dying hunting hound in her father's kennels and felt, for a single humming instant, the animal's pain pour out of it and into her, where it had evaporated like breath off a blade. The hound had lived. Cressara had been sick for 3 days. Her mother had found her in the kennel that night, white-faced and shaking, and had pressed a cold cloth to her forehead and whispered, "Never do that again, where anyone can see you. Never. Do you understand me, my love? They will take you for the order if they know." She had never done it where anyone could see her again. But the ability had not gone away. It had grown. And for the last 6 months, as the marriage treaty was finalized and the wedding date approached, she had been practicing in secret, in the locked solar of her father's manor, with a caged sparrow she brought back from the edge of death, and a lame cat, and once, terrifyingly, with her own bleeding palm. She could feel sickness the way a musician felt an untuned string. She could, with effort, pull it loose. And she had just spent 6 hours in a banquet hall with a man who was being killed slowly, and she had felt every thread of it. She opened her eyes. The wrongness in Valor Thornweald was not a natural wasting. It was not a blood disorder. It was not the coughing illness that had swept the southern provinces last spring. What she had felt, when her hand had briefly touched his during the vows, was the specific resonance of a poison being administered in regular, measured doses. A slow killing. A patient killing. A killing meant to look like a long illness finally winning, and the hand on the back of his chair had been the hand of the man administering it. Chrysara rose from the bed. She crossed to the door and tried the handle. It did not turn. Locked from the outside. She stood there for a long moment, breathing carefully, feeling the cold patch on her throat where the king's mark should have warmed her, and understanding, all at once, several things. She understood that she had not been brought here as a wife. She had been brought here as a witness. A convenient young omega of modest house, with no powerful living relatives, who could be held blameless when the sickly king finally succumbed, and who could be married off again, quickly and profitably, to whichever alpha the regent chose to elevate. She understood that Vylor Thornwald had tried to warn her with the one breath he had left to spend, and had failed. And she understood that she was the only person in this castle who knew what was happening to him, and the only person in this kingdom who could stop it, and the only person in this room who had no idea yet how she was going to get out of it alive. A floorboard creaked beyond the locked door. Someone was standing in the corridor, very still, listening. Chrysara stepped back from the door without a sound and pressed her palm flat against the wood, fingers spread, and felt through the ashwood the heartbeat of whoever stood on the other side. Slow, steady. Not a servant's nervous flutter, not a guard's patient wait. A predator's heartbeat. Measuring. She held her breath. And on the other side of the door, so softly she almost missed it, a man's voice whispered a single word in a tongue she had heard only once before, in a banned book her mother had kept hidden beneath the floor of the orchard chapel. The word meant soon. She did not sleep. She lay beneath the coverlet fully dressed, the silver sash still knotted at her waist. One hand curled around the ivory hairpin her mother had given her the morning of her betrothal. The pin was longer than it looked, and sharpened to a needle at its hidden end. "If you ever need it," her mother had said, "you will know, will." Chrysara had thought at the time that her mother meant against a brute of a husband. She understood now that her mother had meant against something larger. The heartbeat beyond the door had withdrawn eventually. Footsteps, measured and unhurried, had moved away down the corridor. But sleep, after that, was not a thing she could summon. She stared at the ceiling and catalogued what she knew. She knew the king was being poisoned. She knew the regent was the hand behind it. She knew she was locked in a wing of the castle where no one would hear her scream. She knew the ceremonial mark at her throat had been placed by a man so drained of his own wolf that the claim had not properly taken. In wolf law, this meant the marriage was incomplete. In wolf law, this meant she was not yet his, and he was not yet hers. And if he died before the bond was sealed, she would be a widow who had never truly been a wife, and the regent could dispose of her however suited him. She also knew, because she had spent 6 months teaching herself to listen to the architecture of another body's sickness, that Vylor Thornwald was not as far gone as everyone in that banquet hall believed. The poison was not yet in his marrow. It was still in the lining of his stomach, the channels of his blood, and the soft tissue around his heart. It was advanced, yes. Grave, yes. But it was not irreversible. Not if someone could pull it loose before the next dose. By the gray hour before dawn, she had a plan. It was not a good plan. It was the only plan. She rose, washed her face in the cold basin, and pinned her hair up with the ivory needle so that its point rested inside her coil of braids, where no one would see it. She changed out of the wedding gown and into the simple gray day dress the handmaidens had laid out. She ate the cold meal that had been left for her, every bite, because she did not know when she would eat again. Then she waited. The door unlocked at the stroke of the 7th bell. A new handmaiden entered with a curtsy so shallow it was almost a smirk. "My lady, the regent requests your presence in the solarium to break your fast." "I will attend him," Chrysara said. "A moment to compose myself." The handmaiden nodded and withdrew into the corridor to wait. Chrysara stood alone in the middle of the room and considered for one breath the possibility of running, of pleading sudden illness, of sending word to her father. Every option collapsed under examination. Her father had no army. Her house had no allies in the northern reaches. Sending word would take 4 days, and anything less than 4 hours from now would be too late for Valor. She straightened her shoulders, smoothed her hands down her skirt, and went to breakfast with the man who was killing her husband. The solarium of Ostermere was a long, south-facing room walled in windows of green-tinted glass, and at this hour it glowed the color of shallow ocean. Lord Harwick Morven was already seated at the head of a small table laid for two, a steaming cup of something pale between his hands. He rose when she entered, the picture of courtesy, and bowed just deeply enough. "Good morning, my dear niece." He gestured to the chair opposite him. "I trust you slept well." "Tolerably, uncle." She took the seat. She arranged her hands in her lap. She did not let her gaze drop from his. He was a handsome man in the way that very old blades were handsome. Silver at the temples. A jaw that suggested he had been striking once and would be intimidating for another 20 years. His eyes were the color of weak tea, and they held hers with an attention that was almost polite. "I wish to speak with you privately," he said, "before the household wakes. There are matters concerning the king that a wife should understand, and I fear the physicians have been too delicate with you." "Oh?" Chrysara said, and allowed her voice the small tremor that a frightened young bride would permit herself. She had been training for this performance since she was 9. "My nephew is dying, Chrysara." He said it simply as one might report rain. "The physicians have done what they can. The wasting illness has been in him for 2 years, and the rituals of mating were our last hope that a true bond might rekindle his strength. It has not." He lifted his cup, sipped, set it down. "He has weeks, perhaps, not months." "I see," she whispered. "I tell you this because I wish to be honest with you from the beginning of what will, I pray, be a long and mutually beneficial relationship between our houses." He smiled, and the smile reached nowhere. "When Valor passes, you will be a widow without issue. The throne will require a new alpha. The council has already begun discussing successors. There is a candidate among my own sons who would be honored to take the burden of your care and continue the line." Chrysara lowered her eyes and made herself breathe slowly. "There it is," she thought. "There is the whole shape of it, laid out over breakfast, and he thinks I am too small to see it." "My lord," she said, "I am grateful for your candor. May I ask, may I see him? My husband. I would wish to sit with him, as a wife should, even briefly, before the day's business separates us." Harwick's eyes moved over her face for one heartbeat longer than courtesy required. Then he smiled again. "Of course, my dear. It is a pious request. After breakfast, I will have you escorted to his bedside for a quarter of an hour. He rarely wakes now, you understand. But the presence of a wife is a comfort to a dying man, even a sleeping one." "Thank you, uncle." They ate. She made small conversation about the weather and the tapestries, and the journey from her father's lands. She laughed once, softly, at a small joke he made about the ineptitude of court poets. She let him believe, with every bite of bread and every careful word, that she was exactly what he had paid her father to deliver. A pretty, biddable, second-rank omega of no particular intelligence and no particular will. When the meal was finished, he rose and kissed her hand and sent for the escort. The king's chambers occupied the entire top floor of the south tower. 2 guards stood at the outer door, and a third, in the livery of the regent's personal house, stood just inside. Chrysara noted him and said nothing. Valor lay in a bed canopied in midnight blue silk, beneath coverlets embroidered with the running wolves of his house. In the morning light, he looked worse than he had the night before. His skin had the translucent quality of wax left too long near a flame. His dark hair, which she had seen brushed back from his forehead at the altar, was damp now, plastered against his temples. His chest rose and fell in a rhythm too shallow to be called breathing. But his eyes were open, and when she entered they found her, and they were not the flat gray of a stone in a well. They were gold, pale, exhausted, barely holding themselves lit. But gold. He knew her. He knew, somehow, that she had come. The regent's guard stood 4 paces from the foot of the bed, hands clasped behind his back, watching. Chrysara crossed to the bedside and sank gracefully to her knees beside the mattress, the posture of a young wife in grief. She folded her hands over Valor's where it lay on the coverlet. The contact was electric. The moment her skin touched his, she felt the sickness inside him lift its head like an animal noticing her. The poison recognized her, or something in her recognized the poison. A current passed between them that had nothing to do with any bond forged at an altar. Her fingers tingled. The ceremonial mark at her throat, cold all night, began to throb with a faint, uncertain warmth. Valor's fingers twitched beneath hers. She bent her head as if weeping and brought her lips close to his ear. "My lord," she breathed, so softly that the guard across the room heard only a widow's murmur. "Blink once if you can hear me." His eyes closed, opened. "Blink once if you know you are being poisoned." A long pause. Then, slowly, deliberately, his eyes closed and opened again. Her throat tightened. She kept her face pressed near his, her hair falling forward to screen them both. "I can pull it out of you," she whispered. "Not all at once. It would kill us both. But enough to buy you a day. Do you want me to try?" His lips moved. No sound, just shape. "Yes." "It will hurt," she warned. His eyes closed and opened. "Yes." She had perhaps 3 minutes before the guard grew suspicious of a wife who did not weep aloud. She had perhaps 1 minute before the regent sent someone to check. She closed her eyes and she let her hands, hidden beneath the coverlet, spread over the thin cotton of his nightshirt above his heart. And she reached. It was like plunging her bare arm into a river of something that was not water. The poison had a texture. It was oily. It clung. It hated being seen. She felt it recoil from her attention, then, recognizing it could not hide, surge toward her hand like a swarm finding an opening. She let it come. She drew a careful thread of it up, and another, the way her mother had once taught her to pull a splinter from beneath skin without breaking it. Patient, patient, patient. Heat rushed up her arms. Her ceremonial mark burned so brightly for 1 instant that she almost cried out. Valor's breathing, which had been shallow, deepened by a fraction. His gold eyes, above hers, widened. The poison reached her elbow, her shoulder, her throat. She swallowed it. She had not known until that moment that she could swallow it. She had thought, in all her practice, that she would have to expel it somehow, burn it off, and pass it into something else. But her body, touching his, had known what to do without her. The sickness entered her, and her own blood met it, and her own blood, somehow, neutralized it. She did not understand this. She filed the not understanding for later. When she had pulled as much as she dared, she withdrew her hands. Her vision wavered. Her own heartbeat had gone heavy and strange, but Valor's color, in the space of 1 minute, had shifted from wax to something nearer to living skin. "Enough for today," she whispered. "I will come again." His lips shaped another word. "Dangerous." "I know." "Careful." "I know." His hand, so weak a moment ago, found hers and squeezed with a strength that astonished her. His eyes, fully awake now, searched her face with an intensity that nearly undid her composure. For 1 moment there was a man inside the body on the bed, and the man was looking at her, as if he had been drowning in the dark for 2 years and had just seen a light move across the water. Then the guard cleared his throat. "My lady," the regent said, 1/4 hour. Chrysara rose. She curtsied to the bed as a grieving wife should. She did not look back as she walked from the room, because looking back would have shown the guard what her face was doing, and her face was doing something a grieving wife should not do. Her face was smiling. She was returned to the East Wing and told, with regret, that the day's council would occupy the regent until evening. She was to rest. She was to be patient. A tray would be brought for the midday meal. The door locked behind her. Chrysara sat on the edge of the bed and, for the first time since she had arrived at Ostermere, allowed her hands to shake. She had done it. She had pulled poison from a king's heart in front of an enemy guard, and no one had seen. She had bought Valor a day, maybe 2, and she had proven, to herself, that everything her mother had hidden in her was real and functional and capable of saving a life. But she had also, she realized slowly, done something else. The ceremonial mark on her throat, which had been cold and numb since the altar, was now warm, truly warm. The mark pulsed in a slow rhythm that matched. She understood after a moment of listening to it, the heartbeat of the man in the tower above her. Something between them had taken hold, not the full bond. The altar ceremony had been too broken for that. But a thread, a small, stubborn thread, spun from the minute she had spent pouring her living blood against his dying one, and it was holding. She pressed her hand to the mark and closed her eyes, and, for 1 second, she felt him. Not his thoughts, not his words, just the shape of him, somewhere above her in the South Tower. Exhausted and newly aware, and what was that underneath? Grief. Old, buried grief. A grief deeper than the poison. A grief that had been in him longer. She opened her eyes. That was a problem for another hour. She stood, crossed to the window, and looked out over the courtyard. The window was narrow, set deep in the stone, and the courtyard below was empty except for a scullery boy hauling a bucket and, near the far gate, a tall woman in the dark blue livery of the household staff, speaking quietly with a rider who had just dismounted from a lathered horse. The rider handed the woman a sealed packet. The woman slipped the packet inside her bodice. The rider mounted again and rode out through the gate at a pace that suggested a man being paid for speed. Chrysara's interest sharpened. She did not know the woman, she did not know the rider, but she knew a messenger being paid outside the normal household channels when she saw one, and she knew that messages entering Ostermere through the scullery gate at mid-morning were not messages anyone wanted read aloud in the council hall. She watched the woman cross the courtyard and disappear into the east kitchens. She memorized the woman's face. Then she stepped back from the window, sat down at the small writing desk beside the hearth, and began to think about how a locked-in bride with a hidden gift was going to find out what was in that packet before it reached the regent. She had just begun to sketch a plan when a sound, very faint, came from inside the wall behind the hearth. A scrape, a shift of old stone on old stone, and then, clearly, the soft, deliberate tap of a human knuckle against the back of her fireplace, 3 times, paused, 3 times again. Someone was on the other side of the wall. Someone knew she was here. And someone, she realized with a slow cold climbing her spine, was asking to be let in. She did not move for a full breath. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps. It was not a servant's accident. It was not the settling of an old stone house. It was a signal, and whoever was making it knew enough about the bones of this castle to know that behind the east wing hearth ran one of the old smoke passages that every great northern keep had once possessed, and most had since forgotten. She had read about those passages in her uncle's library when she was 14. She had read about them because, even then, she had understood that a woman who would one day be married into a strange house needed to know its secret veins. She knelt beside the hearth. The fire had burned low. She pushed the iron screen aside with both hands and peered up into the flue. Cold air breathed down on her. She leaned in and tapped, very softly, twice against the soot-blackened stone. A pause. Then, from the other side, a voice barely louder than a draft. "If you are the new consort, cough once. If you are her maid, cough twice." A woman's voice, young, northern accent. "Careful." Cressera considered. She coughed once, quietly, into her sleeve. A long silence. Then, "I am going to push a stone. It will make a small sound. Do not cry out." A soft grating. A grinding of stone on stone. At the back of the hearth, behind the iron screen, one of the blackened blocks shifted inward and then sideways, revealing a gap the size of a child's shoulders. Cold air poured through. A face appeared in the gap. Female. Perhaps 17. A scatter of freckles across a snub nose. Hair the color of old copper, scraped back into a servant's knot. Eyes of a startling pale green. "My lady." The girl's whisper was rushed. "I have perhaps 4 minutes. Are you alone?" "Yes." "Good." The girl's eyes flicked past Cressara, scanning the room through the hearth opening. "My name is Rena Isolt. I am a chambermaid of the 3rd rank. I serve in the king's household. I was sent by Meister Olwen, who cannot come himself because he is watched." Cressara's pulse stumbled. "Sent for what?" "To find out," Rena said, "whether the woman they married our king to is an ally or a tool of the regent." Cressara felt the back of her neck prickle. "And how were you to decide that?" Rena's pale green eyes fixed on her. The girl looked very young, and not young at all. "By looking at you," she said, "when I told you that your husband is being murdered." The two women looked at each other through the hearth. "I already knew," Cressara said softly. "I felt it last night. I pulled a thread of it out of him this morning when they allowed me to sit at his bedside. I can do it again tomorrow. I can keep doing it, if we can keep me near him." Rena's mouth opened slightly. She did not speak for several seconds. Then, very softly, "You are the one, then." "The one what?" "The one he dreamed of." Cressara felt the small hairs on her arms rise. "Meister Olwen will explain." Rena's voice was rapid now, a whisper racing the clock. "You cannot stay in this wing. They will kill you within the week. Not now, while the marriage is fresh and the court watches. But soon. The regent has a son. You are to be widowed and remarried before the spring thaw. I am going to get you out tonight." "Out where? I will not leave without Valor." "Not out of the castle. Out of this wing. Into the servant warren, where we can hide you where the regent's people never go. From there, you will be able to reach the king without their seeing." "Why would you do this?" Rena's pale eyes did not waver. "Because my mother was the king's nurse when he was a boy. Because Meister Olwen taught me my letters. Because the regent hanged my brother for saying aloud what half the household knows in silence. Because House Thornweald is the last true line between the northern reaches and whatever Harwick Morven intends to build on its ashes. And I was raised by people who would sooner die than let him build it." It was a lot of answer, delivered in a single breath. Cressara believed her. "Tonight," Cressara said. "What is the plan?" "1 hour after the midnight bell, I will open this passage again. You come through in a servant's grey. I will have one ready. You follow me. You do not speak. If we are caught, you say nothing. I will say you surprised me when I was stealing from your jewel box, and you came after me in anger. The punishment for that will fall on me alone. Do you understand? I will not let you take a lash for me, Rena." "You will," the girl said, "because the only way this works is if the regent never suspects you are moving on purpose. If you try to protect me, we both die." Her jaw set. "My lady, I did not volunteer for this because I wanted to be comfortable. Say you understand." Chrysara, who had been raised among polished servants who would never in their lives have spoken to her in that tone, found her eyes stinging. "I understand," she said. 1 hour after the midnight bell. Rena's hand, soot-smeared, reached through the gap. "Swear it." Chrysara took the girl's fingers in her own. "I swear it." "Good." Rena's hand withdrew. "I am going to close the stone now. Do not pry at it. It opens only from my side. If you need to send word before tonight, push a scrap of cloth into the upper left crack of the hearth. I check it twice an hour." "Rena." "My lady?" "Thank you." The girl's mouth did something that was almost a smile, and then she was gone, and the stone slid back into place with a grinding whisper, and the hearth was only a hearth again. Chrysara sat back on her heels. Somewhere above her, in the south tower, a heart was beating that she could feel in the mark at her throat. Somewhere below her, in the warren of servant passages, a 17-year-old girl was risking her life for a woman she had known for 4 minutes. Somewhere outside this castle, a rider was carrying a packet she had not yet read to someone who did not yet know she existed. The whole world had widened by a dimension in the space of a morning, and she had not yet eaten the midday meal. She had time. She needed to use it. She rose and went to the writing desk and sat down and, on a scrap of blank paper, began to set down, in the tiny shorthand her mother had taught her as a game when she was a child, everything she had learned, everything she suspected, and everything she would need to learn before tonight. At the top of the page she wrote, in her mother's script, 3 questions. 1. What is the poison, and who prepares it? 2. Who rides for Lord Harwick at the scullery gate, and to whom? 3. Why did Rena Isolt say, "I am the one he dreamed of"? She stared at the third question for a long time. The mark at her throat pulsed gently, patiently, in time with a stranger's heart. She tucked the paper into her sleeve, laid her head briefly against her folded arm on the desk, and let herself breathe for 1/2 minute before she lifted her head and began to plan the rest of the day. Evening came slowly. She was not invited to supper. A tray was brought to her door by a servant she did not know, set down on a small table, and taken away an hour later untouched. She ate only enough from the midday tray to keep her strength, because she did not trust any food that came through a locked door from the regent's household, and she had spent the afternoon watching the hearth and listening to the corridors and practicing, behind her own closed eyes, the thin, careful pull she would need to perform again on Valor as soon as she could reach him. The mark at her throat stayed warm all afternoon. Twice she felt it flutter, as if the heartbeat on the other end of the thread had quickened. Once, near the 4th hour of afternoon, it had fluttered hard and stayed that way for several minutes, and she had pressed her hand to it and whispered, "Hold on, hold on, hold on," and she had not known if anyone could hear her. Just before the midnight bell, she dressed in the darkest of the gowns the handmaidens had laid out, a deep slate-blue wool that would hide soot. She took down her hair and rebraided it tight against her skull. She slid the ivory needle back into its hiding place. She checked the scrap of paper in her sleeve. The midnight bell rang. She sat by the hearth and counted. When the count reached 1 hour, she heard very faintly the grinding whisper of stone moving. Rena's face appeared in the gap. "Quickly!" Chrysara ducked through. The smoke passage was narrow, cold, and entirely black. Rena pressed a wad of rough gray cloth into her hands, a scullery maid's overdress, and Chrysara pulled it on over her gown. Rena pressed a small shuttered lantern into her hand. The lantern leaked only a single finger of light. "Stay close. Do not speak. If we pass a grate and you see light through it, freeze until I move." They moved. The passage ran for what felt like a long time behind the walls of the east wing, then turned sharply and began to descend. Chrysara, who had a good sense of direction, understood after a while that they were moving under the courtyard. The air grew damper. The walls sweated. Somewhere, very distantly, water was dripping into stone. Rena stopped at a T-junction and crouched. This way goes to the kitchens. This way goes to the old chapel beneath the south tower. We take the chapel way. Maester Olwen waits there. Under the south tower, Chrysara repeated. Under your husband, yes. The chapel is directly below his bedchamber, separated by 30 feet of stone and a floor. It is the oldest part of the keep. The regent's people do not use it. They believe it is haunted. Is it? Yes, Rena said, and did not elaborate. They took the chapel way. The old chapel beneath the south tower was a small, low-vaulted room of black stone, lit by 4 candles burning in iron brackets and smelling of old incense and river water. A figure sat on the single stone bench along the far wall, wrapped in a dark cloak, white hair loose around a thin, patient face. He rose when they entered. Maester Olwen Drave. My lady. He bowed, slowly and deeply in the old style. Forgive the setting. It is the only room in this castle where we can be certain we are not overheard. Chrysara crossed to him. Maester, I have questions. I know you do. I have answers to some of them. Sit, please. You have done a brave thing already tonight, and the next hour will require more bravery still. She sat on the stone bench. Rena remained standing by the door, listening for footsteps in the passage. Olwen lowered himself beside Chrysara with the careful arrangement of an old body. First, he said, the most urgent matter. You pulled poison from my king this morning. Yes. How? I do not fully know. I have had the ability since I was a child. My mother hid it. Your mother. His eyes moved over her face with a new attention. Your mother was Lenora of House Vesmara. Yes, I knew her, long ago, before she married your father. She was briefly a novice of the Order of Still Waters, was she not? Chrysara stared at him. She never told me that. She would not have. The Order was disbanded 80 years ago, its healers scattered, its knowledge forbidden. Those few who carried the blood gift hid it in their daughters and their daughters' daughters. Your mother carried it. You carry it. It is a very old thing, my lady, older than the Wolf Kings, older than this keep. It is what let you touch the poison in Valor and pull it into yourself without dying. The strangeness of the morning, the way the poison had entered her and been neutralized inside her own blood, the thing she had filed for later, unfolded itself inside her. The gift, she said slowly, is the reason the poison did not kill me. The gift is the reason you exist. Olwen's old eyes were very bright. Lenora was told, the year before her death, that her only daughter had a resonance stronger than any the Order had recorded in 300 years. She was told to hide you until you were grown. She did. She died for it, I think, though I have no proof. Chrysara had to look away for a moment. The small flames of the 4 candles blurred. Second, Olwen said gently, after allowing her the moment. The matter of the dreams. She lifted her head. My king has dreamed of you for 2 years. What? From the first month of his illness. He dreamed of a woman with dark hair and gray eyes who laid her hands on his chest and drew sickness out of him like silk. He dreamed of her face so often and so clearly that he had it painted in secret and kept the painting in a locked drawer of his writing desk and told no one. Not his advisors, not his uncle, not me, until he was too weak to keep it any longer. Olwen's voice was very soft. When the betrothal portrait of you arrived from House Vesmara 6 months ago, he looked at it once and wept. And he signed the marriage treaty that same afternoon without negotiating a single clause, and the regent thought him mad with fever, and laughed, and allowed it. Chrysara could not speak. He did not marry you for alliance, Olwen said. He married you because he had seen you. He did not know who you were, or how you existed, or what you could do. He only knew that a woman with your face had been coming to him in dreams for 2 years, pulling the dying out of him, and that if she was real, he had to bring her within reach before the poison finished its work. Does he? Does he know I have the gift? He knows now, Alwyn said. He knew the moment you touched him this morning. The dreams have been true dreams, my lady. Whatever runs in your blood reached him before you did. He has been holding on for 2 years because he believed you would come. The mark at Crisara's throat pulsed hard, and her eyes stung, and she did not bother to hide it. Third, Alwyn said, and then we must move, because our time is shorter than I would like. Yes, the regent has a man. Crisara straightened. A man where? Within your father's house. A man who has been in place for 2 years. A man who was instructed, the day your betrothal was signed, to prepare for a particular day. That day was yesterday. That man was instructed, upon the completion of your wedding ceremony, to ride north at full speed with a sealed packet. She went very still. A packet which arrived at the scullery gate this morning. Alwyn's eyes sharpened. You saw it. From my window. Then you have seen the last of what I can tell you with certainty, because I do not know what the packet contained. Only that Lord Harwick has been waiting for it for many months, and that, whatever it is, he intends to use it against you. Against you specifically, my lady, not against the king. Against his new bride. Crisara's throat was dry. What could he possibly hold against me? I have lived 23 years in my father's house. I have left nothing behind me that... She stopped, because she had left one thing behind her. A locked solar, a caged sparrow, and a lame cat, and her own healed palm, and 6 months of practice that she had believed utterly, completely secret. Oh, she whispered. Alwyn was watching her face. They know, she said, whoever the regent's man is in my father's house. He has been watching me. 6 months of watching me. He saw. He saw enough, Alwyn said softly, to put it in a sealed packet and ride 4 days without stopping to deliver it to Lord Harwick on the morning after your wedding. I believe so. Yes. What will the regent do with it? He will use it, Alwyn said, to have you burned as a witch of the Forbidden Order before the end of the week. Your marriage to the king will be annulled retroactively. Your body will be given back to your father in a sealed casket, and the throne will pass without friction to whichever of his sons he has already chosen. The old physician's voice did not waver. Unless we get you out of reach before the packet is read, or we get to Valor's condition before the pyre is built, or we do both. Which is what we are going to try to do tonight. From the doorway, Rena's voice, low and tight. Maester. Footsteps. Upper corridor. 2 sets. Moving this way. Alwyn rose at once. Crisara rose with him. Her hands did not shake. There was no room in her, any more, for her hands to shake. Something had locked itself in place inside her chest during Alwyn's last sentence. Something hard and clean and steady, and she recognized it after a moment as rage. How much time? Alwyn murmured. 4 minutes? Maybe 5? Then we have 4 minutes to decide. He turned to Crisara. My lady, the choice is yours. You can return to the east wing before the footsteps reach this floor, and we can begin preparing a quieter escape over the next 2 days. Or you can stay below tonight, and we can move you to the king's bedside within the hour, and you can pull more poison from him while there is still time to save him, at the cost of revealing that you have left your chamber. If the second, you cannot go back. You will be a fugitive in your husband's own castle before dawn. Do you understand what I am asking you to weigh? Crisara did not have to weigh it. She had weighed it last night, in a locked room, listening to a predator's heartbeat on the other side of a door. Take me to him, she said. Olwen's old face did something complicated. He bowed his head. Rena, the tower stair. Rena was already moving. Follow, fast, do not look at anything but my back. They left the chapel at a run. Behind them, in the passage above, the footsteps were close enough now that Crisara could hear them as distinct sounds. 2 men, armored, unhurried. The step of men who believed they had all the time in the world and a locked door at the end of it. They did not know yet that the door they were walking toward was empty. They did not know yet that the woman they were coming for was already 3 floors below them, in a servant's gray, running toward her husband with her hands warm and her mark burning, and the ghost of an 80-year-old order of healers waking up inside her blood. At the bottom of the narrow tower stair, Rena stopped so abruptly that Crisara nearly ran into her back. A man stood at the foot of the stair. He was tall and broad, and wearing the livery not of the household, not of the regent, but of a private guard Crisara did not recognize. His hand was on the hilt of a short blade. His eyes, finding her face in the lantern light, widened for one instant in pure astonishment. Then he smiled. "My lady consort," he said, in a voice that was almost gentle. "You are a long way from your bed." And he drew his blade. Rena moved before Crisara's mind had caught up to her body. The girl had a small knife, a kitchen paring blade, in her hand already. She stepped in front of Crisara with a fierceness that was almost comic in someone her size and said, "You will not touch her." The man at the foot of the stair tilted his head. The lantern caught a scar that ran from his right ear down into the collar of his livery. He was perhaps 40. He did not look like a man who had ever been afraid of a girl with a paring blade. "Child," he said in that same gentle voice, "put the knife down before you hurt yourself." "Step aside," Rena said. "I will not. I have been posted at the foot of this stair for 6 weeks. I have waited, every night, for someone to come down it who should not. You are the first." His eyes moved from Rena to Crisara, and then to Olwen, who had descended the stair behind them and now stood with his hand lightly on Crisara's elbow. "Maester Drave," the man said, and inclined his head a fraction. "Good. Then I am not mistaken." Olwen's fingers tightened on Crisara's arm, but his voice, when he spoke, was steady. "Captain Renholt." The name meant nothing to Crisara, but the tension in the old physician's body changed in a way she could read. He had been braced for an enemy. He was now braced for something more complicated. "Captain," Olwen's voice lowered. "You swore an oath." "I did." "To whom?" The man with the scar let out a long breath. He lowered the blade slowly, hilt still in his palm, until the point rested against the stone floor. He did not sheath it, but he lowered it. "To the same person you swore yours to, Maester." His eyes moved back to Crisara. 18 years ago, in the nursery of the South Tower, over the cradle of a boy who could not yet walk. Olwen's hand on her elbow trembled once, and then went still. "Prove it," the old man said. Captain Renholt reached into the collar of his livery and drew out a fine chain. A small pendant hung from it. He held it out into the lantern light. It was a wolf, cast in old silver, caught mid-leap. Around the wolf, 4 small stars. Olwen made a sound in his throat that Crisara did not know how to name. "The Hearthguard," he whispered. "The last of us, Maester. 6 men, 2 women. Scattered through the household on the regent's own payroll because he believed we served him when he bought our old lord's estates. He did not understand what he was buying." Captain Renholt tucked the pendant back beneath his livery. "We have been waiting, some of us longer than others, all of us for her." He turned to Crisara and, to her astonishment, went down on one knee on the cold stone. "My lady consort." His voice was not gentle now. It was the voice of a man delivering a vow that had lived inside him for 18 years. "I serve the king of the northern reaches and the house of Thornweld. I have served in silence since the day my king could not speak for himself. Tonight, if you will have me, I serve you." Cressara's throat locked. She had been prepared to fight. She had been prepared to run. She had not been prepared for an armored stranger to kneel at her feet in a cellar and offer her his sword. She found her voice somehow. How many? How many what, my lady? How many of you? In this castle, 8. In the city beyond these walls, perhaps 40. In the northern reaches, if word can be carried, between 200 and 300. Not an army. Not yet. But more than the regent believes exists. And you have done nothing until now. We could do nothing until now. Renholt's jaw tightened. My king has been dying for 2 years. To move against the regent while the king could not stand would have been to forfeit the throne to the regent's sons in a single week. We needed the king alive, and we needed something that could save him. We had neither. His eyes held hers. Until this morning, when Maester Drave sent word that his bride had laid hands on him and the color had come back into his face. Cressara looked down at her own hands. The skirt of her gray overdress was soot-smudged. Her fingers were thin and steady. "Rise, Captain," she said quietly. "We do not have time for kneeling." He rose. "Footsteps," Rena hissed. "Still coming. They have not yet reached the east wing door." "Then we have perhaps 2 minutes," Olwen said, "before they find the chamber empty and begin to search. Captain, can you buy us time?" "I can delay a discovery by an hour," Renholt said. "No longer. I have 2 men at the east wing door who will swear they saw the lady asleep through the crack at the 9th bell. After that, any more than an hour is a lie that will not hold." "An hour is enough," Olwen said. "Take us up." Renholt did not ask up where. He knew. He turned without another word and led them, not back up the narrow stair they had descended, but through a low, arched door Cressara had not seen in the wall of the chapel passage. Beyond it, a second stair, tighter, steeper. A stair meant for one person at a time, built into the thickness of the south tower wall. "The king's private stair," Rena whispered at Cressara's shoulder as they climbed. "It has not been opened in 80 years. Only 3 people in the castle know it exists." "4," Renholt said from ahead. "4 now." They climbed. The stair ended in a panel of carved oak that was, from the far side, the inside of a cabinet in the king's dressing chamber. Renholt pushed it open from the back. The cabinet had been emptied of its linens on some previous night. A thin light leaked around the seams of the cabinet's outer door. He held up one hand, listening. Cressara heard, very faintly, the sound of a single person moving about the bedchamber beyond. The soft clink of a tray being set down. A cough. The rustle of cloth. Renholt's lips brushed the air beside her ear. "The night attendant. One of mine. You are expected." He eased the cabinet door open. The king's bedchamber was dim, lit by a single oil lamp turned low. The air smelled of bitter herbs and the faint sweetness of the poison Cressara had learned to recognize in the lining of her own throat. A young man in the livery of the royal household stood beside the bed, a tray in his hands. He looked up when the cabinet opened and did not startle. He only nodded once, a short, economic nod, and set the tray down. "My Lord Maester. My lady." His voice was a breath. "He has been waiting." Cressara crossed the chamber on soundless feet. Valor Thornweald lay as she had left him that morning, but not as she had left him. The color she had bought him with 1 minute of pulling had faded. His breath was shallow again. His skin had the waxen translucency. But his eyes were open when she reached the bedside, and they found her. And they were the pale gold of his house, and they were absolutely lucid. "You came back," he said. His voice was the softest thing in the world. A used-up thing, but it was a voice. "I came back," Cressara said. She sank to her knees beside the bed, the way a wife should, though no one in this chamber needed the performance anymore. She took his hand. "My lord, I need you to tell me how much pain you can bear tonight." His mouth moved into the shape of something that might, in a healthier body, have been a smile. All of it. I may have to pull a great deal, she said. More than this morning. More than I have ever pulled. It will hurt you, and it will hurt me, and we may not have another chance like this one for days. Do it. If I take too much at once, I do not know what it will do to me. Do not take too much. If I take too little, the regent will dose you again at dawn, and you will lose what I have given back. Valor's golden eyes held hers. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with an effort that cost him visibly, "Take everything you can take without dying. I will carry the rest." She almost broke. She did not allow herself to break. Not yet. She lowered her head over their joined hands and she closed her eyes, and she pressed her free palm flat against his chest, above his heart. And she reached. The poison rose to meet her. It rose in volume this time. Not a thread. A tide. She had prepared herself for a thread. What came up her arm felt, for one terrifying instant, like a river turning in its bed to find her. It filled her fingers, her wrist, and her forearm. Her vision went black around the edges. Her mother's voice, somewhere far inside her memory, said, "Patient, patient, patient." She held. She did not try to take all of it. She could not. What she did instead was what she had learned in 6 months of secret work with a dying sparrow. She took what she could swallow without drowning, and she let the rest fall back into the body it had come from, and she sealed the edge of the wound behind it as she withdrew. It took, perhaps, 4 minutes. 4 minutes in which her own blood roared in her ears, and her mark on her throat burned so fiercely she thought it would leave a scar. And 4 minutes in which Valor's breathing, beneath her palm, deepened and deepened and deepened, until it was the breathing of a sleeping man and not the breathing of a dying one. When she opened her eyes, there was blood in her mouth. She did not let it show. She swallowed. The taste of the poison, neutralized now, was bitter and metallic, and went down like an old grief. Her hands were trembling violently. She laid them flat on the coverlet to still them. Valor was looking at her. His face had changed in the 4 minutes. The waxen quality was gone. The hollows beneath his cheekbones were still there, but the skin above them had the faint flush of living blood. His eyes were more gold than they had been all day. He looked, for the first time since she had met him, like a man. "Crisara," he said. She had not, until that moment, heard him say her name. "My lord." "Valor." "When we are alone." "My name is Valor." "Valor," she whispered. He lifted her hand, the one that had rested over his heart, and pressed his lips to the inside of her wrist. The touch was weightless. It was the touch of a man who was barely strong enough to lift her fingers. But she felt it through every nerve in her body, and her mark burned, and his chest beneath her other hand rose with a clean, unobstructed breath, and she understood, with a clarity that was almost painful, that something in her had just decided she was not going to let this man die. Not tonight. Not of this poison. Not of this uncle. Not ever, if she could help it. "The dreams," she said. "Olwen told me about the dreams." A shadow crossed his face. He turned her wrist in his fingers as if reading a page. "I did not know if you were real. I am real. I did not know if I was going mad. You were not. I have watched for you," he said, "in every face that has come into this chamber for 2 years. I watched for you in the faces of the healers they brought, and the faces of the council wives who came to pray, and the faces of the regent's daughters. I watched for you even when I could not remember why I was watching. I did not know your name. I did not know your house. I only knew the shape of your hand." Her eyes stung. She did not wipe them. A tear fell onto the back of his wrist, and he did not move his hand away. "I dreamed of you too," she said softly. "I thought they were fevers. I thought I was remembering a patient I had not yet met. I did not know what they were. What did you dream? A man with gold eyes in a dark room, calling to something in his chest with a voice I could not hear. I would reach for the voice in my sleep, and when I did, my hands would grow warm, and I would wake with the sheets soaked in sweat. She laughed, a small broken sound. I told no one. I thought I was going mad too. Neither of us was mad. No. Come here, he said. She did not know what he meant. She leaned forward. He lifted his head, which must have cost him a great deal, and he pressed his forehead to hers. That was all. Just his forehead, cool and living, against hers. They stayed like that for several breaths. The mark at her throat, which had burned and burned all evening, went quiet and warm and steady, like a coal banked for the night. Somewhere behind her, Alwyn had turned discreetly toward the window. Rena, near the door, had her back to them. Captain Renholt stood at attention beside the cabinet, eyes on the door. Valor lowered his head back to the pillow. "The Regent," he said. His voice was stronger now, still quiet, but no longer a whisper. "Tell me what you know." She told him, in rapid, economical sentences, the way her mother had taught her to deliver bad news. The blue torches, the breakfast in the solarium, the packet at the scullery gate. Olwen's revelation about the order and the man in her father's house. The plan to have her burned as a witch before the spring thaw. She did not soften any of it. Valor listened without moving. When she finished, his eyes had gone from gold to something closer to molten copper. "How long?" he said quietly. "Until the Regent reads the packet." "I do not know. Perhaps he has already read it. Perhaps he is waiting until morning to make it official, to have the council assembled when he does." "He will want the council," Valor said. "He will want it witnessed. He has always wanted an audience for his cruelties. He inherited that from my grandfather." He closed his eyes for a moment. "Open them. Then we have until dawn." "Until dawn for what?" "Until dawn," he said, "to decide whether I die in this bed as he planned, or whether I rise from it." The chamber went very still. Olwen turned from the window. "My lord, you cannot stand." "I will stand," Valor said. "If my wife has pulled enough of his poison out of me that my legs will hold. Maester, look at me and tell me honestly whether I can stand." Olwen crossed to the bedside and laid the back of his hand against Valor's throat, then his wrist, then his chest. The old physician's face went through several expressions in quick succession, none of which Chrysara could entirely read. "Not tonight," he said at last. "You have no reserves. She has given you breath, not strength. Walking would kill you before morning. Then not walking, sitting, in a chair, in the council hall, at dawn, in full view of every noble the Regent has summoned to witness his triumph." Valor's gaze moved to Chrysara. "Can you give me that much?" "Sitting for an hour in a chair," she said slowly, working it out. "Speaking aloud, without collapsing." "Yes. If I pull more poison from you between now and then, perhaps 2 more sessions. If you eat. If you sleep 4 hours." She looked at Olwen. "Meister?" "It is possible," he said. "It is very near the edge of possible. It will leave him utterly spent for the week after." "1 hour in a chair at dawn is enough," Valor said. "1 hour to unmake the Regent in front of witnesses. Then let the week fall as it will." "My lord," Olwen said very quietly, "you are speaking of the second great gamble of your life. I was present at the first. I am not sure I have the nerve for another." Valor's mouth moved into something that was almost a smile. "You have the nerve, Meister. You have always had the nerve. You simply prefer not to use it." Olwen bowed his head. Chrysara, who had been holding Valor's hand all this while, felt his fingers tighten around hers. She looked down at him. "Wife," he said, and the word was soft and strange and new in his mouth. "Will you stand with me at dawn?" "I will stand with you at dawn. Even knowing that if we fail, we will both die before noon." "Even so." "Even knowing that the packet in the regent's hand may contain enough to have you condemned before I can speak." "Even so." He lifted her hand again, pressed it this time to his cheek, held it there. "Then we have until dawn," he said, "and I have something to tell you that I have told no one in 2 years, and you must hear it before we walk into that hall." Her breath caught. "Tell me." He drew a long, careful breath. His eyes did not leave her face. "The regent," he said, "did not act alone. There is a second hand in this. There has always been a second hand, and the second hand is not in this castle." "Whose hand?" "Chrysara." His voice went very gentle. "The second hand is your father." The chamber tilted. She did not make a sound. She could not have. Her ears were ringing. Somewhere, distantly, she registered Rena's quick intake of breath by the door and the soft oath Captain Renholt swore under his own. She registered Olwyn's face, already grieving for her. She registered the cool of Valor's palm against the back of her hand. Her father, who had wept at her mother's funeral. Her father, who had held her on his knee when she was 4 and called her his little lamp. Her father, who had signed the marriage treaty saying he was saving his house. Her father, who had not been saving his house. Her father, who had been paid in advance, by a man already killing his nephew, to deliver a daughter with a hidden gift straight into a grave, dug years ago. Outside the South Tower, somewhere in the deep dark before dawn, a bell tolled the 3rd hour of the morning. They had 3 hours left. She did not weep. She had thought, in the instant Valor spoke the words that she would. She had prepared herself, all her life, for the possibility that her father loved her less than she believed, because her mother had hinted at it in the last months of her life. She had not prepared herself for the possibility that he had helped to sell her. But the tears did not come. Something colder did. "Tell me how you know," she said. Valor's thumb moved once across the back of her hand. "A letter was intercepted 3 months ago, in the coastal pass, by one of my own riders who thought he was serving the regent and was, in fact, serving me. The letter was from your father to my uncle. It confirmed an arrangement of 2 years' standing. It named a sum. It named a date." "What date?" "The day after our wedding. The day they expected me to die." "What sum?" He hesitated. She saw him hesitate. She understood, in a small, dim corner of her mind, that was still capable of understanding anything, that he was trying to spare her. "Say the sum, Valor." 300 gold marks, he said quietly. "And the rights to the Upper Vesmara orchards for a period of 30 years. Her mother's orchards. The orchards where her mother had been poisoned." Chrysara heard from a great distance a small dry laugh leave her own throat. Not amusement. Not even grief. Simple recognition. The dim corner of her mind that was still working had just fitted the last piece into place. Her mother had not been poisoned by a stranger. Her mother had been poisoned by the same hand that had signed the marriage treaty. Her mother had, in all likelihood, discovered some thread of this arrangement and had died for it, and her father had grieved convincingly in front of the household, and then, 6 months later, had begun the negotiations that ended with Chrysara kneeling at this bedside. "Chrysara," Valor's voice was careful, "I did not tell you in order to wound you. I told you because when we walk into that council hall at dawn, your father's hand will be in the packet the regent reads. If you are not braced for it, the regent will use your face against you. He will let the hall see a bride who did not know, and he will turn it into an argument that your whole house is infected." "I am braced," she said. "Are you? Ask me in an hour." Rena came forward then, a clean cloth and a small cup of water in her hands. She pressed the cloth into Chrysara's palm. "Your mouth, my lady," she whispered. "There is blood." Chrysara wiped her lips. The cloth came away pink. She drank the water. She breathed. She thought about her mother, standing in the orchard at sunset in the last autumn of her life, braiding apple blossoms into Chrysara's hair and humming a tune that Chrysara had later recognized in a banned book as one of the old healing chants of the order. She thought about her mother's hand cupping the back of her neck. She thought about her mother saying, "Never do that again where anyone can see you. They will take you for the order if they know." Her mother had not been afraid of the order. Her mother had been of the order. Her mother had been afraid of the people who would destroy the order a second time, and who had already begun to destroy her own house. Chrysara set the cup down. Her hands were steady. "I will carry it," she said. "Tell me the rest." Valor and Olwen exchanged a glance. Olwen spoke. "The letter named 4 signatories to the arrangement, my lady. The regent. Your father. A third man whose name we do not yet know with certainty, though we suspect one of the southern lords. And a fourth. A woman." "A woman?" "Yes." "Who?" Olwen's old face did something she did not like. "We believe it is the prioress of the House of Quiet Hours." Chrysara's head snapped up. The House of Quiet Hours was the cloistered order of Omega women that every noble daughter of the northern reaches was sent to at the age of 16 for 1 year of religious instruction. Chrysara had spent her 16th year there. She had liked it. The prioress had been kind to her. "No," she said. "My lady." "No, the prioress gave me books. She let me into the library no one else was allowed to use. She stopped. The dim corner of her mind, which had been doing nothing but fitting pieces together for the last quarter hour, fitted one more. The prioress had given her books. The books had included, among other things, a slim volume on the structure of healing resonance that had taught her, without ever using the word, how to begin to recognize the gift she already carried. The prioress had watched her read it. The prioress had watched her practice once, on a fainting novice in the garden, and had said nothing. The prioress had been testing her. Not teaching her. Testing her. Cataloging her. Sending reports, almost certainly, to the man who would one day need to know exactly what this particular Omega's bloodline could do. Chrysara closed her eyes for a moment. "Yes," she said quietly. "It was the prioress. I believe you." "I am sorry," Olwen said. "Do not be sorry, Meister. Be useful. Tell me what else is in that letter." Olwen inclined his head. "A plan. A specific plan for what the regent is to do once you are safely inside this castle. 3 stages. The first was the ceremonial marking at the altar, which he knew would not take properly because my king had not the strength to make it take. The second was a single night of your presence in the castle, long enough to satisfy the legal form of a marriage. The third was your denunciation, within the week, as a witch of the Forbidden Order, based on evidence gathered by your father's house and conveyed north by a trusted rider. The old physician's voice was dry. The rider who arrived at the scullery gate yesterday morning. And the evidence? I do not know what the evidence is, my lady. But I know that a girl who had practiced in secret for 6 months in a locked solar of her father's house would have left traces. A stain on a stone, a scorch in a rug, a burned feather, a lock of hair perhaps, taken from her pillow without her knowing. Any of these, in the hand of an experienced denouncer, would be enough. Chrysara opened her eyes. She had done her practicing in the small locked solar at the top of the east stair of her father's manor. She had cleaned it carefully after each session. She had, she now realized, not been the only one who knew the key. "He has enough," she said. "Whatever the packet contains, it is enough." "Yes." "Then we cannot wait until dawn," she said slowly, feeling her way through it. If the regent reads the packet at dawn and denounces me before the assembled council, even with Valor seated beside me, the shock of the accusation will do half his work for him. Half the council will waver before Valor can speak. If we arrive after the denunciation has been made, we have already lost the opening minute. And the opening minute is the only minute we have. What do you propose? Valor said softly. We arrive before the council convenes. We are already seated when they enter. The regent finds us there when he comes to spring his trap. He is the one who is surprised. He is the one who must speak first. And he must speak first to a king who is very visibly not dead. A slow, fierce smile moved across Valor's face. My wife, he said, is a strategist. My wife's mother, Chrysera said, was a strategist. I am only remembering what she taught me. Captain Renholt. My lord. Can you have the council hall ready? Can you have my chair placed at dawn, no later? Can you have 8 of your 8 in the hall by the 4th bell? Can you have the outer doors controlled so that the regent enters last and finds us waiting? I can, my lord. Can you do it without a single man of the regent seeing you do it? Renholt paused. Not without. I can do it without any of his men believing what they see. It is not the same thing, but it is enough. Do it. My lord. Renholt bowed and was gone through the cabinet before the echo of the bow had faded. Valor turned back to Chrysara. His eyes were brighter than they had been. The pulling she had done had not only cleared poison, it had, she was beginning to suspect, started something in him that was feeding itself now, like a banked fire catching fresh air. One more pull before dawn, he said. Can you manage it? Yes. But not yet. Let my blood settle. An hour from now. Sleep then. I cannot sleep. Then lie here beside me, he said, and rest your eyes. That is an order from your husband if it needs to be one. She almost laughed. It was an astonishing thing, in the middle of this night, to be almost capable of laughing. Alwyn, discreet as ever, took Rena by the elbow. Child. The anteroom. There is a small couch. We will wait there, and we will wake them at the 4th bell. Maester, Rena said. Yes, child. I am going with you when you wake them, the girl said fiercely. She is mine to guard now. Alwyn's old face softened into something that, in a less grave hour, would have been a smile. She is ours, he said. Come. They withdrew. The door of the anteroom clicked softly shut. Chrysara, after a long moment, towed off her soot-smudged slippers and lay down on the coverlet beside her husband, on top of the blankets, a careful hand's breadth of space between them. She did not touch him. She did not need to. The mark at her throat hummed, and she could feel the slow, steadying beat of his heart as if it were a second pulse inside her own chest. Valor, she said. Yes. When this is over. If it is over. And we are both alive. Yes. I will want to know you. Not the king. The man. The boy you were before you were a king. The dreams you had that were not me. The griefs you have carried that I have not yet had time to see. A long pause. She thought for one breath that he had fallen asleep. Then, very quietly, you already know the most important grief, wife. Tell me anyway. 2 years ago, he said, I had a brother. Her breath caught. I know, he said softly. No one speaks of him now. That is itself what the regent did. My brother's name was Corin. He was 11 years old. He was with me in the hunting lodge at Greyvale when the first dose took me. He saw the cup I drank from. He saw the man who poured it. He was old enough to understand what he had seen, and too young to know that he should keep it to himself. 2 days later, he drowned in the lake behind the lodge. They said he had gone swimming alone. She could not speak for a moment. Valor. That is the grief, wife. That is the grief under the poison. I have been lying in this bed for 2 years carrying it, and no one living in this castle has known, and I have never said his name aloud to another living soul. Until tonight. She did not think. She turned on her side and she laid her hand flat over his heart, on top of the coverlet, and she kept it there. Corin, she said softly. His name was Corin. Yes. I will say it with you then, as often as you want to hear it said. His hand came up and covered hers. It was not a strong hand, but it was warm. Rest, he whispered. An hour. I will wake you. She rested. She did not sleep, exactly, but she floated, for a while, in the warm darkness just below sleep, with her husband's heartbeat under her palm and the mark at her throat pulsing quietly, and her mother's voice, very faint, somewhere at the edge of her hearing, humming the old healing chant. When the fourth bell rang, she was ready. The anteroom door opened at the first peal. Rena and Olwen entered on silent feet. Renholt was not with them. He was already in the council hall below. A small tray had appeared on the table. Broth, bread, a cup of pale wine mixed with something Olwen had prepared. Drink, my lord, Olwen said. All of it. Valor drank. Chrysara rose from the bed and went to the basin to wash her face and throat. She retied her hair. She replaced the ivory needle at the crown of her braids. She shrugged out of the servant's gray overdress, which Rena folded and tucked into a bag that vanished at once into the cabinet passage. Beneath the overdress, her slate blue gown was creased but clean. Rena went over it with a small brush. Olwen produced from somewhere a cloak of the deep thorn-wheeled blue with a silver clasp shaped like the leaping wolf. My lady, the consort's cloak of state. It should have been presented to you at your wedding. The regent forgot, it seems. How convenient of him, Chrysara said dryly, and let Rena fasten the clasp at her throat. She knelt beside Valor one more time. The poison was lighter in him now than it had been all night, but it was not absent. She laid her hand on his chest and drew, very carefully, one more thread. It was shorter this time, and thinner, and she did not bleed from her mouth when it was done, though she felt her vision gray briefly at the edges. Valor's color, when she opened her eyes, was the closest to human it had been since she had met him. Enough, Olwen said quietly. Any more, and you will faint on the stair. Enough, she agreed. Two of Renholt's men entered through the cabinet. They were broad, competent, silent. They helped Valor into a doublet of black wool worked in silver thread. They fastened the sword belt around his waist and set, into the empty scabbard at his hip, a short ceremonial blade she did not recognize. His father's, Olwen murmured at her elbow. It has not been drawn in 20 years. It does not need to be drawn today. Only seen. They did not put him on his feet. They placed him in a low-backed chair with carrying poles beneath the arms, and the two men lifted him as one, without strain, and they began to carry him down the king's private stair. Chrysara walked ahead with Rena. Olwen walked behind. The stair was long. At its foot, another of Renholt's men waited. He bowed. He led them through the old chapel, through a short corridor Chrysara had not seen before, and up a broader stair that emerged, without warning, into the antechamber behind the great carved doors of the council hall. The council hall itself, beyond those doors, was beginning to fill. She could hear, faintly through the wood, the murmur of nobles taking their benches, the scrape of a chair, a cough, the low, authoritative voice of a herald announcing the hour. The fourth bell has sounded, the herald called. The regent enters at the fifth. 1 hour, Renholt whispered, appearing beside her. We are in place. Chrysara drew a breath. She smoothed her cloak. She looked back at her husband. Valor in the chair looked paler than she would have liked. But his eyes were open, and they were gold, and they were alive. He nodded once. A small, deliberate nod. Now. Renholt pushed the doors inward. The council hall of Ostermere was a long, high-vaulted room with benches rising on two sides toward a central aisle. At the far end, on a raised stone dais, stood the king's chair. Carved oak, leaping wolves at the armrests, empty for 2 years. Beside it, a smaller chair had been placed for the consort. Empty, also, for this was its first morning. 40-odd nobles sat on the benches. They had been expecting, Chrysara understood, as their heads turned in unison toward the opening doors, to witness the regent preside over a council in the king's absence. To hear some small piece of state business. Perhaps, if they had sharp ears and had been listening to servant gossip, to witness the regent's first careful mention of a trouble concerning the new consort. They had not been expecting, she understood, as the murmur died into absolute silence, to see the king. Valor was carried down the central aisle in his chair. He did not slump. He did not close his eyes. He sat upright, one hand resting on the pommel of the ceremonial sword, his gold gaze moving over every bench in the hall. Each noble who met his eyes dropped their own. Chrysara walked beside the chair. She did not look at the benches. She looked straight ahead, at the raised dais, at the king's chair that had been empty for 2 years. Behind them, Olwen followed. Beside her, Rena, who should not have been in this hall at all, and was walking with her chin up as if she had been summoned by name. Around them, 6 of Renholt's 8, arranged in a loose formation that was not quite a guard and was also, unmistakably, a guard. They reached the dais. Renholt and his second lifted Valor from the carrying chair and settled him onto the king's chair with an ease that made it look, to the watching hall, as if the king had simply chosen to be helped. Valor's hand did not leave the sword pommel. His spine did not bow. Chrysara took her place beside him. She sat. She folded her hands in her lap. She kept her face composed. In the silence, a single whisper moved along the back bench and was silenced. And at the far end of the hall, the great doors at the back opened a second time. Lord Harwick Morven entered. He had 6 of his own men with him. He was dressed for a council in the gray and dark red of his house. His silver hair was freshly brushed. He was speaking as he came through the doors to the man beside him. His voice carried easily in the hush. And I shall expect the packet to be read in full before the formal business. There is a matter of witchcraft that... He stopped. He had seen the dais. For one full breath, Lord Harwick Morven, regent of the northern reaches, stood motionless in the open doorway of the council hall, with 40 nobles watching his face, and his nephew seated, alive and upright, on the throne he had been quietly burying for 2 years. The regent's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The silence in the hall was the most beautiful silence Chrysara had ever heard. Valor's voice, when it broke that silence, was not loud. It did not need to be. The hall had never been so ready to hear it. "Uncle," he said, "how good of you to join us. Come forward. Read your packet." The regent did not come forward. He stood in the doorway for long enough that the silence began to take on a texture, a thickening of the air, the kind of silence that tells 40 nobles at once that something is very wrong and that they should not, under any circumstances, be the first to move. Lord Harwick Morven was a man who had built a great deal over 2 careful years, and he was a man who understood, in the way that men of his sort always understand, that the next 30 seconds would decide whether any of it survived. He collected himself. Chrysara watched him do it. The regent's breath steadied. The color returned to his face. The corners of his mouth lifted into a small, composed, almost paternal smile. He inclined his head toward the dais with a grace that was genuinely impressive, given what had just happened to him, and he began to walk down the center aisle at the unhurried pace of a man approaching his own carefully planned triumph. "Your Majesty," he said warmly as he came, "what joy! What unexpected and hard-won joy! Your strength returns to you at the very hour I had hoped to plead with the council for a new round of prayers on your behalf. The gods are merciful indeed." He reached the foot of the dais. He did not kneel. Crisara noted that. He inclined his upper body. He did not kneel. "Uncle," Valor said. His voice carried, clear and unhurried. "I understand you arrived this morning with a sealed packet, a matter, you were saying just now as you entered, of witchcraft." Harwick's smile did not flicker. "A sensitive matter, Your Majesty, which I had intended to raise with the council privately before troubling your rest. Perhaps, given the delicacy of your recovery, we might defer it to an hour when—" "We will not defer it." Valor's golden eyes did not move from his uncle's face. "You will read the packet now, in full, in this hall, before these witnesses, and we will decide its merits together." A current moved along the benches. Crisara felt it the way one feels the first pull of a tide. 40 nobles, who had come to this hall expecting to watch the regent perform, were suddenly sitting very straight, because the king had just spoken like a king, and not one of them had expected that to happen this morning either. Harwick's face did something interesting. It did not fall. It did not harden. It did something more expensive than either. It adjusted. "As you wish, Your Majesty." He produced the packet from inside his doublet. It was bound in dark leather and sealed with a device Crisara did not recognize, but which Olwyn, beside her, made a small sound at the sight of. Harwick broke the seal with deliberation. He unfolded 3 sheets of thick paper. He cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, my lords and ladies of the council, it grieves me deeply to bring before you the evidence you are about to hear. It grieves me especially because the subject of this evidence is our king's own bride, whom we welcomed into this house not 24 hours ago with every hope and blessing. But an uncle's grief and a regent's duty must sometimes serve the realm over the household." He had recovered entirely. Crisara watched him with something close to admiration. He was a bad man, but he was a beautifully trained bad man. "The first document," Harwick continued, "is a deposition taken from a servant of long service in the household of House Vismara, a man of unimpeachable record. He deposes, under oath, that he has observed, over a period of 6 months, the Lady Crisara of Vismara engaging in rituals consistent with the forbidden practices of the Order of Still Waters. He names specific dates. He names specific chambers. He names specific evidence. I will read." He read. It was, Crisara had to grant him, an excellent document. Precise. Unadorned. A ledger of her own 6 months of careful secret work. Transcribed with the methodical care of a man who had been paid to watch. The caged sparrow. The lame cat. The scorch mark on the blue rug that she had thought she had scrubbed away. Her own name, in her own hand, in the margin of a volume on healing resonance she had borrowed from her mother's locked chest. 4 of the entries were days when she had truly practiced. 6 of the entries were days when she had not, but when a reasonable inference from circumstantial evidence could have placed her in the solar. The deposition did not distinguish between the 2 kinds of days. To a reader, they blurred together into a pattern. By the time Harwick finished reading the deposition, a full third of the nobles on the benches were no longer looking at the king. They were looking at her. "The second document," Harwick said smoothly, "is a report from the prioress of the House of Quiet Hours, covering the Lady Crisara's novitiate year. It notes, with what I can only describe as prayerful concern, that the Lady Crisara demonstrated, even at the age of 16, certain aptitudes which the prioress felt obliged to document, but which, out of charity and out of hope that the aptitudes would fade, she did not at that time report." He read that one too. Crisara sat and listened and did not move. Valor, beside her, did not move. She could feel, through the mark at her throat, that his pulse had quickened. He was furious. He was holding it. She was holding hers. "The third document," Harwick said, "is the most painful, Your Majesty, and I beg your indulgence in the reading of it, because it comes from the hand of a man whose love for his daughter is, I do not doubt, entirely genuine, and whose grief in writing it is evident in every line. It is a letter from Lord Marin of House Vismara, the Lady Crisara's own father, written to me 6 weeks ago upon the first confirmation of his fears." She did not move. She did not change her expression. She had been prepared for this. She had been prepared for this for exactly 3 hours. But hearing her father's name spoken aloud in this hall, in her husband's presence, cost her something she had not known she still had left to lose. Harwick read. The letter was a masterpiece of its kind. It was the letter of a heartbroken father begging his lord's mercy. It expressed in language dignified and restrained a father's horror at discovering, too late to stop the wedding, that his daughter had been secretly practicing the abominated arts of the dissolved order. It begged the regent to consider leniency. Given the Lady Crisara's youth and the corrupting influence, it could only be assumed of her late mother, who had perhaps, God forgive her, passed along more than apple blossom songs. It entreated the regent, should the evidence be found sufficient, to allow the condemned bride a merciful end and a quiet burial, out of regard for the living father's shame. The letter was dated 6 weeks before Crisara had ever set foot in Ostermere, 6 weeks before the wedding. The father who had held her on his knee when she was 4 and called her his little lamp had sat down, 6 weeks before her wedding, and written a letter asking for her merciful execution. A soft murmur moved along the benches. A few faces turned toward her with expressions of real pity. More turned away, because a denunciation from a father's own hand was a weight that none of them wanted to be seen doubting. Harwick folded the 3 sheets. He looked up. His face was grave and kind. "Your Majesty, my lords and ladies, I take no pleasure in what I have just read. I took no pleasure in carrying it north. I took no pleasure in the long nights of prayer in which I considered whether to spare your Majesty's recovering strength the burden of hearing it at all." He bowed his head a fraction. "But a consort who practices the forbidden arts cannot remain in the king's chamber. A marriage solemnized in ignorance of such practices cannot stand. And a realm that tolerates what the Order of Still Waters represented cannot call itself a realm under the gods." He paused. "Ah, I humbly ask the council," he said, "to annul the marriage, to remand the Lady Crisara to the custody of the temple courts for examination, and to appoint, in the interest of the northern reaches and the continuity of the throne, a proper queen from among the daughters of the realm." The murmur on the benches rose. It was not, Crisara noted with a small cold precision, a murmur of outrage at Harwick's request. It was a murmur of calculation. 40 nobles, adjusting in real time to a new set of incentives. That was the thing Harwick had counted on. He had not needed them to love him. He had only needed them to see, clearly, which way the wind had turned. Valor drew a breath beside her. She reached, without looking, and laid her hand over his where it rested on the sword pommel. Not a wifely gesture, a steadying one. "Let me," she thought, through the mark. "Let me take this one." She did not know if he could hear her through the mark. She thought, from the way his fingers unflexed beneath hers, that he could hear something. She rose. She did not rise quickly. She rose as her mother had taught her to rise, at 14, in a banquet hall full of her father's rivals. With the unhurried grace of a woman who has all the time she needs and no wish to be rushed. "My Lord Regent," she said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The hall had been waiting to hear whether the bride would speak at all, and the moment she did, 40 pairs of ears turned toward her as a single organism. "My Lord Regent, may I see the letter from my father?" Harwick had not expected that. Crisara watched him not expect it. He had expected tears. He had expected a denial. He had perhaps, in his more optimistic projections, expected a faint and a carrying out. He had not expected her to ask, politely, for the document. "Of course, my lady," he said, recovering quickly. "Although I should warn you that its contents, as you have already heard, are—" "Yes, I heard its contents. I would see it. If it is, as you say, written in my father's hand, then I, of all people in this hall, will recognize the hand. I have had 23 years to learn it." A faint ripple moved along the benches. It was a reasonable request. It was, in fact, the only request a falsely accused bride could make, and she had made it in the most reasonable possible voice. Harwick hesitated. Then he stepped up onto the first step of the dais and extended the third sheet toward her. Cressera took it. She did not unfold it immediately. She held it in her hands. She looked down at it the way a woman looks down at a thing that has hurt her. And she allowed her face to show, for exactly 3 seconds, the grief of a daughter who has just heard her father's betrayal read aloud in a council hall. The benches were very still. Several of the women on the benches, she saw from the corner of her eye, were moved. Good. She unfolded the letter. She read the first line, then the second, then the third. Then she looked up. "My Lord Regent," she said, "this is not my father's hand." A murmur. Sharp. "My lady," Harwick said smoothly, "grief can make even the most familiar hand look strange. If you will allow me—" "I have not finished, my lord." She did not raise her voice. She simply did not allow him to interrupt. "This is not my father's hand. It is a very good imitation. Whoever prepared it has clearly studied his correspondence. But my father has a habit, which has been known to me since I was a child, and which I believe he has never himself noted, of forming the lower loop of the letter G with a small inward curl before closing it. This is a habit he developed, my mother once told me, from a childhood tutor who struck his knuckles when the loop was not properly closed. It is so ingrained in him that he does it even when drunk, even when ill, even when in a great hurry. It is in every letter he has ever written to me. It is in every document he has ever signed in my presence. It is in the marriage treaty that brought me to this castle, which I am certain is still filed in the chancery of this keep, and can be brought to this hall within the hour." She held out the letter. It is not in this document. The loops of the G are all closed cleanly, in a style my father has not used since he was 15 years old. I invite any member of this council to send for the marriage treaty and compare." Silence. Harwick's face did a thing. She watched it do the thing. He was a man who had been checked in the chess sense without yet being taken. "My lady," he said, and his voice had lost a fraction of its warmth, "I would remind you that documents written by a grieving father may not reflect his customary—" "Send for the treaty, my Lord Regent," said a voice from the fourth bench on the left. Cressara did not look. She did not need to look. Olwen, behind her, let out the smallest possible breath. The voice belonged, she would learn later, to Lady Havrin of House Storm's End, a woman of 62 who had served on the council since Valor's father's reign, and who had never forgiven the regent for a slight delivered to her husband in a private audience 12 years ago. Lady Havrin had no particular investment in Cressara. She had, however, a very long investment in humiliating Harwick Morven when an opportunity presented itself. Another voice, from the second bench on the right. "Send for it." A third. "Send for the treaty." Harwick's jaw tightened, very slightly. He inclined his head. "Of course. Fetch the marriage treaty from the chancery." A page ran. In the minutes it took for the page to return, Cressara did not sit down. She remained on her feet, holding the letter, her face composed. She felt, through the mark, Valor's pulse steady beneath her hand. She felt behind her Rena's absolute stillness. She felt in her own blood the faint metallic aftertaste of the poison she had swallowed 2 hours ago, and she thought, calmly, if this does not work, I will have perhaps 7 minutes to use what my mother taught me before they reach me with a blade, and I intend to use it. The page returned. The treaty was laid in her hand. She unfolded it beside the letter. She held them up together, high enough that the 3 nobles nearest the dais could see both pages clearly. The G in Marin, she said. The G in agreement. The G in regency. Compare, my lords, if you please, with the G in grief, the G in goddess, the G in gladly in this second document. Any one of you, please, come forward and look. Lady Havern was already on her feet. So was a younger man on the front bench whose name Cressera did not know. They came to the foot of the dais. They examined the 2 documents side by side for a full minute each. Lady Havern turned to face the hall. The hand in the marriage treaty, she said, and her voice, for a woman of 62, carried magnificently, is not the hand that wrote this letter. I have known Lord Marin of House Vesmara for 31 years. I know his writing as well as I know my own. The Lady Cressara is correct. This letter is a forgery. The murmur that moved through the hall then was not a murmur. It was a sound. Harwick said nothing. His face had gone very still. Cressara, watching him, understood that she had just taken a piece off the board, but had not taken the king. There were still 2 documents she had not addressed. There was still a deposition from a servant. There was still a report from a prioress. There was still, behind all of it, a quiet and methodical man who had built for 2 years, and who was not yet finished. She had perhaps 30 seconds before he recovered. She used them. My lords and ladies. She raised her voice now. Not much. Enough. I will not deny every line of what has been read this morning. Some of it is true. I will not stand before this council and pretend to be a woman I am not. I carry, in my blood, the gift of the Order of Still Waters, passed to me from my mother, who received it from hers. I did not ask for it. I did not seek it. I did not practice it for any purpose but to understand what I was. And I will tell you, in this hall, under the eyes of my husband and under the eyes of the gods, precisely what it is, and what I have done with it, and what I have done with it in this castle, in the 2 days since I arrived. A gasp, somewhere on the left bench. Cressera did not look. She looked only at Harwick. For I have used it in this castle, my Lord Regent, 3 times, and the man I used it on is sitting beside me, upright and breathing, for the first time in 2 years. Harwick's head turned, very slowly, toward Valor. Valor smiled. It was not a large smile. It was a small, tight, entirely lethal smile. It was the smile of a man who had been lying in a bed for 2 years watching the hand of his uncle on the back of his chair, measuring. Shall I tell them what I was dying of, uncle? Valor said quietly. Or would you prefer to tell them yourself? And the council hall of Ostermere, for the first time in 2 full years, held its breath. Harwick Morven did not answer. He did not answer for a long moment, and in that moment Cressara understood that he had made a calculation. He was not going to speak. He was going to act. The council had tipped against him in the matter of the forged letter, and he had perhaps 1 chance to reclaim the room, and speaking was not going to be enough. His hand moved, very slightly, toward the inside of his doublet. Cressara saw it. So did Captain Renholt, who had been standing at the foot of the dais with the stillness of a man pretending not to be a soldier, and who was now, without appearing to move quickly, somehow 3 paces closer. My Lord Regent, Renholt said mildly, you should know that if your hand completes the motion I believe it is beginning, you will not survive the next breath. I say this as a courtesy. Harwick's hand stopped. Every noble in the hall had seen it stop. Every noble in the hall had, a heartbeat before, registered what the hand had been reaching for. Something shifted on the benches. Not a murmur. A settling. The sound of 40 people deciding in the same instant that they had not, after all, misread the tide. Harwick lowered his hand slowly to his side. "Captain Renholt," he said, and his voice was almost pleasant. "You have mistaken your duty." "I do not think I have, my lord." "Your duty is to the regent of the northern reaches." "My duty," Renholt said, "is to the king of the northern reaches, the gentleman seated behind me." A long silence. Harwick's eyes moved slowly around the hall. He was counting. Crisara could see him counting. He was looking at the benches, at the doors, at the guards lining the walls, at the small, clean formation of Renholt's men arranged, apparently at random, in a ring whose points of tension she had only now understood. He was calculating how many of the armed men in this hall served him, how many served the king, and how many were, in this exact moment, still deciding. The number of still deciding was, she saw him realize, larger than he had prepared for. A voice from the third bench, thin and old, cut the silence. "My Lord Regent, answer the king's question." Crisara did not need to look. Old Lord Alder, she would learn later, of the House of Wend, who had served on 3 councils and had long suspected privately what his neighbors had been too comfortable to suspect aloud. Harwick turned back to face the dais. For one more second, he was the composed regent of 2 years. Then, in front of 40 watching faces, something in his composure slipped, not collapsed, slipped. The corner of his mouth did something that was not a smile. His eyes, moving from Valor to Crisara and back, changed. "Very well," he said softly. It was not a surrender. Crisara understood, with a cold precision, that it was an opening move. Harwick Morven did not surrender. Harwick Morven changed the shape of the board. "Very well," he said again, louder. "Since my nephew invites candor, I will give him candor. Your Majesty has, as you so eloquently demonstrate this morning, recovered. I rejoice in it, truly. But recovery from a wasting illness of 2 years is not a thing that comes from air. It comes from cause. And the cause of your recovery is the woman beside you, who has, by her own admission in this hall, worked the forbidden arts upon your person." He let the sentence sit. "The question before this council," Harwick continued, "is not whether the Lady Crisara's gift is real. She has confessed. The question is whether the king of the northern reaches has been saved by witchcraft or has been further enspelled by it, whether the man who sits on that dais is the king restored to himself or the king bound to the will of the witch who restored him. And that, my lords and ladies, is not a question any of you can answer by looking at him." A murmur, less certain this time. Crisara felt the room, which had swung toward her a moment ago, hesitate. Harwick had found the one argument that could still work. She had known, the moment he began to speak, and that he would find it. It was the oldest argument in the oldest books. A gift of healing was, to frightened people, indistinguishable from a gift of compulsion. The council had no way to test the difference. They could only believe one or the other, and belief was a thing he had 2 years of careful planning already invested in. She felt, through the mark, Valor draw breath to answer. "No," she thought at him. "Not you, me. He wants you to defend me. If you defend me, he wins the frame." She did not know if he heard the thought. But he did not speak. She stepped forward 1 pace. She held the forged letter in her left hand. Still. She did not put it down. It was a useful prop. It reminded the room, without her needing to say so, that Harwick had already been caught in one lie today. "My Lord Regent," she said, "you raise a question this council cannot settle by looking. You are correct. So let me offer you a test this council can settle by looking." Harwick's eyes narrowed. "I will not ask you to believe my word," Crisara said. I will not ask you to believe my husband's. I will ask you to believe your own eyes. I will ask this council to send for a person you have not expected me to name, and I will demonstrate, in front of you, the difference between the gift of still waters and the thing you have accused me of. My lady, Harwick said carefully, I do not think. Send for Meister Olwendrave's apprentice, Toman Vale. Chrysara turned to the hall. Toman Vale fell from a horse 11 days ago in the Outer Bailey. His left leg was broken in 2 places. Meister Olwen set the bone, but the knee did not set well, and the boy has been unable to walk without a crutch. Meister Olwen will confirm this. Olwen, behind her, bowed his head. I confirm it, my lords. The boy is in the infirmary at this moment. He is 14. He cried himself to sleep 2 nights ago over his crutch. Send for him? Chrysara said. Bring him into this hall. Set him before me. I will ask nothing of him, but that he permit me to lay my hand upon his knee. I will speak no words. I will use no ritual. I will draw no circle. I will simply touch him, in front of you, and you will watch what happens. And when he walks out of this hall without his crutch, you will understand that what I do is not witchcraft, and what I am is not a thing to be burned. A stirring in the hall. Harwick's voice, sharp now. My lady, this is theater. It is a demonstration, my lord. You accused me of a crime. I offer you a test. If you prefer not to put me to the test, then your accusation is not an accusation. It is a sentence. Which is it? Harwick's jaw moved once. He had, Chrysara saw, no good answer. If he refused the test, the hall would understand that he had not wanted the test to happen. If he permitted it and she succeeded, the hall would see a miracle. If he permitted it and she failed, he won everything. He had to believe she would fail. And of course, Chrysara understood in the same breath, he did believe she would fail. He had read the prioress's report. He knew what she had done with a sparrow and a cat, and a 16-year-old novice's faint. He had no reason to believe she could knit a boy's knee in the middle of a council hall in front of 40 witnesses, because such a thing had not been done in this realm in 80 years, and he did not, in his heart, believe it could be done at all. He was going to let her try. Very well, he said, his voice smooth again. Send for the apprentice. Lady Haverin's hand went up before Harwick's own page could move. I will go, she said. With 2 of my own guard. I would prefer to witness for myself that the boy brought before us is the boy in question, and that he is brought to us in the state Meister Olwen describes. A flicker of frustration crossed Harwick's face. He had wanted his own man to fetch the boy, Chrysara understood, so that some small interference could be worked along the way. Lady Haverin had denied him. Of course, my lady, Harwick said. She went. Chrysara did not sit while they waited. She stood on the dais beside her husband's chair. Her hand remained on his where it rested on the sword pommel. She felt, through the mark, his exhaustion beneath his control. He was running on the clean thread she had given him at dawn, and nothing more. He could last another hour. Perhaps 2. Not 3. The hall was almost silent. A few whispers moved along the benches, but they were not the whispers of people plotting. They were the whispers of people waiting to see something they had never seen. Olwen came to stand at her other side. My lady, he said under his breath, you have not pulled poison in 3 hours. You pulled a great deal last night. Are you certain you can— I am certain, she said. The boy's knee is not a simple bruise. The bone has begun to knit crookedly. What you will need to do is not pull. It is unmake and remake. That is different work. I know, Maester. You have not done it before. I have not done the pulling of poison from a dying king in a watched bedchamber before, Maester. I did it. I will do this. He looked at her for a long moment. His old eyes were wet. Your mother, he said softly, would have been very angry with me for allowing this. My mother would have been in this hall doing it herself, Meister, if she had lived. She did not live. I did. Let us finish what she began. Olwen bowed his head. The doors at the back of the hall opened. Lady Havern returned. Behind her walked a boy of 14, thin, dark-haired, pale with nerves, leaning heavily on a wooden crutch under his right arm. His left leg was wrapped from thigh to ankle in stiff linen. Each step he took cost him a wince he was trying not to show. Chrysara watched him come and felt, absurdly, her eyes fill. He had not asked to be part of any of this. He was 14 and his knee hurt, and he had been woken before dawn and walked through cold corridors into a hall full of staring nobles. He was frightened. He was trying, with the fierce small pride of a boy of that age, not to show it. She descended one step of the dais, then another. She stopped on the third, so that the boy, when he reached her, would not have to climb. "Tommen," she said softly. "My lady." His voice cracked on the second syllable. "I am sorry that this has been asked of you. You were not brought into this for your sake. I will try to be worthy of that. May I touch your knee?" He looked for a confused moment at Meister Olwen behind her. Olwen nodded once. "Yes, my lady." "Sit. Here. On the step. Put your weight on the crutch and let yourself down slowly. Good. There." He sat. She knelt in front of him, on the cold stone of the third step, in full view of the council. She did not look at the hall. She did not perform. She laid her right hand gently on the linen over his knee, and she laid her left hand on his shoulder, and she closed her eyes. The hall behind her ceased. For her, to exist. There was only the boy's knee, and the specific wrongness inside it, and the living current of her own blood, and the old chant at the edge of her hearing in her mother's voice. She listened. She found the break. 2 places, as Olwen had said. The larger break had already knit, but crookedly, with a small ridge of new bone where no ridge should be. The smaller break had not knit at all. It had been pinned in place by the linen, and was healing slowly, and would leave the boy with a stiffness he would carry for the rest of his life, if nothing changed. She did not pull. She listened, instead, to what the knee wanted to do. Bone, her mother had told her once, knew its own shape. Bone remembered. Bone could be reminded. She reminded it. She did not know, afterward, how long she knelt there. The hall would say it was 7 minutes. To her, it was one long breath. She felt the ridge of misplaced bone soften beneath her palm, almost like warm wax. And then she felt it flow, not quickly, with the patient inevitability of water finding its own level, back into the shape it was meant to hold. She felt the smaller break find its other half and settle. She felt the torn ligaments on either side draw together and knit. The boy, beneath her hand, gasped once, and then went very still. It did not hurt him. She made sure it did not hurt him. Pain, she had learned with the sparrow, was the thing one took away before anything else, because a body that was not in pain could remember its own shape more easily. When she opened her eyes, Tommen Vale was looking at her with the stunned, tear-bright eyes of a boy who has just been told he will run again. She rose. She took the crutch gently from beneath his arm. She set it aside on the step. "Stand up, Tommen." He looked at her. "Go on." He put both hands flat on the step. He pushed himself up, slowly, testing. His weight transferred onto his left leg. He flinched, braced for pain. The pain did not come. He straightened. He stood on both legs like a boy. He took one step, another, a third. He turned to face the hall, and his face did a thing Chrysara would remember until she died, and he walked, without a crutch, down the center aisle of the council hall of Ostermere. The silence in the hall was a thing with weight. Halfway down the aisle, Tommen began to cry. He did not stop walking. He walked the whole length of the hall, to the great doors, and he turned, and he walked back to the foot of the dais, and he stood looking up at Crisara with tears running openly down his face. "My lady," he whispered. "It was already yours, Tomin. I only reminded it." She turned to the council. "My lords and ladies, that was the forbidden art of the Order of Still Waters. That, and nothing more. A reminder. A listening. A mending. It is what my foremothers were burned for, 80 years ago, in a generation that had forgotten what they were for. I will not be burned for it today." No one answered. Then, slowly, from the fourth bench on the left, Lady Havron of House Storm's End rose to her feet. She did not speak. She lowered herself, with the careful joints of a woman of 62, to one knee. In the direction of the dais, in the direction of Crisara. On the second bench on the right, a younger lord rose and knelt. Then an older lord at the back. Then 3 more. Then a dozen. Within the space of a minute, 2/3 of the Council of Ostermere was on one knee on the cold stone of the hall, and the rest, those who had not yet decided, were rising from their benches because sitting was no longer a tenable position. Crisara did not kneel back. She did not weep. She stood on the 3rd step of the dais, above a boy who could walk, and she looked past the kneeling council, down the long aisle, to the man at its far end who had not knelt. Harwick Morven stood at the doors of the council hall alone. His hand had moved again to the inside of his doublet. This time, he completed the motion. He drew what he had been reaching for. It was not a blade. It was a small glass vial of pale liquid. He held it up. "Your Majesty," he called, and his voice was loud enough now to carry, loud enough to silence the small rising murmur of the hall. "I will not be put on trial by a witch and a kneeling council. I will leave this hall. I will leave this kingdom. I will leave your life, nephew, which I have nevertheless loved in my own way, longer than your wife has known you exist. But before I go, I will take with me the one thing you have gained in this sorry room." His thumb flicked the stopper out of the vial. He raised the vial to his lips. No, Crisara understood with a cold certainty a fraction of a second too late. Not for himself. He is not drinking it. Harwick Morven did not drink. He flung the vial. It came through the air in a clean arc, aimed not at her, not at the kneeling council, not at the dais. It came at the chair, at Valor. Crisara moved without thinking. She was standing one step below the dais. She was not close enough. She threw herself upward anyway, onto the dais, in front of her husband's chair, and the vial struck her, not Valor, and shattered against the clasp of her cloak at the base of her throat. The pale liquid splashed across her chest and shoulders and throat. It soaked into the wool of the cloak. It ran down onto her skin. Some of it, she understood almost at once, had gone into the ceremonial wound at her throat, the unsealed mark of her wedding night, the mark she had spent 2 days willing to warm. The pain was immediate. It was not like the pain of the poison she had pulled from Valor. That had been the patient chronic ache of a long killing. This was a sharp, brilliant, tearing pain, designed to work quickly, and designed for moments exactly like this one. It was the poison Harwick had kept in reserve for the day everything went wrong. It was, she understood, as her knees went loose beneath her, the same poison that had killed her mother. She felt her blood recognize it. She felt her body begin to answer. Oh, she thought, very clearly, with a calm that she would not later be able to explain. Oh, this is what I am for. She had pulled poison from one man. She had, in doing so, understood the first shape of what her blood could do. What she had not understood until this moment was that poison was not the only thing her blood could meet. Her blood could meet its opposite. Her blood could unmake its opposite. Her blood was not a cup for the sickness. Her blood was a fire. She felt the firelight. The pain receded. Not because the poison was gone, because her body had stopped accepting it as pain and had begun accepting it as fuel. The slate blue wool of her cloak darkened at her throat, into something nearly black. The silver clasp in the shape of the leaping wolf went hot against her collarbone, and then, as she watched with a clarity that was almost amused, went white. Light began to come out of her. It was not the clean golden light Olwen had described in the old books. It was paler than that. Silver, almost blue. The color, she would understand much later, of the still waters the order had taken its name from. It moved out along her arms and down to her hands. It moved up her throat and along her jaw. It did not warm her. It was not warm. It was clean. The council hall had gone entirely silent. Harwick Morven, at the far end of the hall, had taken one step backward. Chrysara straightened. Her knees had not buckled. She did not know when she had caught herself. She stood on the dais in her darkening cloak, with pale light moving along her skin, and she looked down the length of the hall at the man who had just thrown at her husband the poison that had killed her mother. "Harwick," she said. He did not answer. "Harwick, look at me." He looked. He could not, she saw, do otherwise. Something about the light, or the quiet, or the thing that was happening to the air in the hall, held him. "I am going to let you leave this room," she said. Her voice did not shake. "I am going to let you leave this kingdom. Not because I forgive you. I do not. Not because you deserve it. You do not. I am going to let you leave because my husband, whose throne you have attempted to steal and whose brother you murdered, will need to bring you to open trial before the three kingdoms of the Reach, and a trial is only possible with a living defendant. So you will live, today, for him." Her hand, of its own accord, lifted. The pale light at her fingertips gathered and concentrated. "But you will live," she said softly, "as I leave you. Listen to me, Harwick Morven. You will not lift a weapon against my husband or myself or anyone who has knelt in this hall this morning for the rest of your natural life. You will not speak against us. You will not write against us. You will not send, by hand or by proxy or by inference, any instruction that can be read as moving against us. And if you attempt any of these things, my blood will know, wherever it is in this kingdom or beyond it, and it will find the poison you have so generously placed inside me this morning, and it will answer. You understand me?" She lowered her hand. A long silence. Harwick Morven made a small choked sound. He took a second step backward. His back met the closed doors behind him. "What are you?" he whispered. "I am what my mother was. I am what the prioress taught you to be afraid of, and then taught you to use. I am what you believed had been burned out of this realm 80 years ago. I am the gift of still waters, and I am the bride your nephew brought into this house, and I am standing in front of you now with your poison in my blood, alive. Go." He went. He went the way a man goes when a thing he has spent 2 years building has been taken out of his hands in the space of one morning and replaced with something he does not know how to hold. He did not run. He was not capable of running. He turned, fumbled with the door, and walked out of the council hall of Ostermere alone. 2 of Renholt's men followed him at a distance. They would not let him reach a horse. They would not let him reach a blade. They would deliver him to the outer gate and set him on the road south, on foot, with provisions for 3 days, and they would watch until he was out of sight. Whether he survived the walk to the coast was a matter, Renholt would say afterward, for the weather. Chrysara did not watch him go. She turned, on the dais, to her husband. The pale light along her skin was fading now. The poison, she understood with a distant part of her mind, was still in her. She had not unmade it. She had contained it. It would need to be pulled, slowly and carefully, over the next several days, by the only person in this kingdom who was capable of pulling it, who was also herself. It would not kill her. Probably. Valor was on his feet. She did not know how. He had not been able to stand at dawn. He was standing now. He had one hand braced on the arm of the king's chair. His face was white, and his breathing was hard, and his gold eyes were wet. "Wife," he said. "Husband. Come here." She came. She stepped up onto the dais and into his arms, and he caught her, and he held her, and whatever strength he had summoned to stand was spent entirely in holding her up, because her own strength, now that it had finished its work, was abruptly and catastrophically leaving her. "I have you," he said into her hair. "I have you. I have you. I have you." "The mark," she whispered. "Yes. It is warm. Yes. Complete it. Now? Now. Here, in front of them. Not because we need the council to witness. Because I want the first clean thing I feel, after this, to be you." Valor made a small, broken sound. He lowered his head to the hollow of her throat. His lips found the ceremonial wound that had been cold for 2 nights and warm since morning, the mark that the regent's poison had touched, and that her own blood had cleaned without her asking. His teeth, carefully, rested against her skin. He bit. The bond sealed. It was not the explosion the old songs had described to her when she was a child. It was quieter than that. It was the soft, complete click of a key turning in a lock it had been wrong for all her life. And then, suddenly, right. She felt him in her chest and in her wrists and in the small of her back. She felt, all at once, the shape of his grief for his brother, and the shape of his 2 years of dreaming, and the shape of the boy he had been before any of this. She felt, for the first time in her life, known. When he lifted his head, she did the same, in the same place on his throat, and she gave him back what he had given her. The Council of Ostermere, still on its knees, watched in silence. The rest of the morning, and the rest of the week, and the rest of the month, Chrysara would remember afterward only in pieces. Valor was carried back to his chamber before he collapsed, which he did, gracefully and entirely, the moment the hall doors closed behind them. He would sleep for 2 days and eat small meals for a week, and Chrysara, whose own body was carrying the last of Harwick Morven's parting gift, would spend those days lying beside him in the great bed of the South Tower, with their hands tangled on the coverlet and her blood, slow and patient, pulling the poison out of herself by inches. Olwen attended them both. Rena slept on a cot by the door and would not leave. Captain Renholt took charge of the keep, and in his quiet, competent way, began to dismantle the small web Harwick had built inside the household. 3 servants vanished in the first night, conveyed away to the coast for later trial. 2 kitchen staff turned out, on questioning, to be agents of the prioress of the House of Quiet Hours, and were taken into custody. The prioress herself, when riders reached her cloister 4 days later, was found to have died in the night, of what Olwen, receiving the report, said only was a very convenient heart. Lord Marin of House Vesmara was not, as it transpired, the man Harwick had described in his forged letter. He was also not, as Chrysara had feared, the man she had believed her father to be. He was, it emerged from his steward's terrified confession a week later, a man who had spent 2 years in the quiet custody of one of Harwick's agents, watched at every meal, dictated to in every letter, broken in slow stages so that he no longer had the strength to refuse what was asked of him. He had signed the marriage treaty under duress. He had not written the letter that accused her. He had, in the locked upper chamber of his own house, where the agent had kept him for the final month before the wedding, written a very different letter, which he had hidden in a place he had hoped his daughter would find. The letter was brought to Ostermere. It was given to Chrysara. She read it alone, in the window of the king's chamber, with her husband asleep in the bed behind her. She wept for a long time. She did not share the contents with anyone except Valor, who read them when he was strong enough, and then held her for an hour without speaking. Her father would not recover. The 2 years had taken too much of him. He would live, quietly at Ostermere for another 4 seasons, in a warm, south-facing room where Crisara could sit with him each afternoon. He would call her, near the end, his little lamp. He would not remember, most days, the worst of what had been done in his name. On the days he did remember, she would hold his hand and say nothing, because she had come to understand, slowly, that there was no forgiveness large enough for what had happened to him and her mother both, and that the only thing to do with a grief that large was to sit beside it until it softened. She sat beside it. Valor sat beside her. The first snow of the year came early, in the 3rd week after the council hall. Crisara watched it fall from the window of what was now, formally, the Queen's chamber. Rena, who had been elevated to chief attendant of the Queen, and who was bearing the promotion with the grace of a girl who had always known she was meant for more than the 3rd rank, brought a wrapped parcel to the window. "From the village below, my lady, a mother whose child you tended last week." Crisara unwrapped the parcel. Inside, an apple. A single perfect winter apple, kept carefully from the autumn orchard. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she reached up, without thinking, and touched the ivory needle in her hair. The needle had lived in her braids since the morning of her wedding. She had forgotten, most days, that it was there. She drew it out now and held it in her palm beside the apple. The ivory was yellowed with age. A fine crack ran down one side where the wood of the handle met the needle. Her mother had carried it. Her mother had told her once, since she was Crisara's age. Her mother's mother had carried it before that. It had been a needle, originally, for the orchard. For threading apple blossoms onto strings, in the old spring rite of the order, when the novices had walked the rows and sung the healing chant over the young fruit. Crisara had used it only twice, once as a weapon she had not needed, and once as a hairpin. She set it down on the window ledge beside the apple. "Rena, my lady, tomorrow, in the orchard behind the south tower, there should still be a few late blossoms clinging on. Would you walk with me?" "Yes, my lady." "Bring the needle." "Yes, my lady." They walked the next morning. Crisara was strong enough by then to walk. She took Rena through the rows of the old orchard, and she showed her, for the first time, the small rite her mother had taught her when she was 6 years old. They threaded 3 late blossoms onto a string of white thread with the old ivory needle. They hung the string from a low branch. They sang together a few bars of the chant, whose words Crisara did not fully know, but whose melody lived in her blood. When they came back inside, Valor was sitting up in a chair by the fire for the first time since the council hall. He watched her cross the chamber. His gold eyes were tired and amused and entirely his own. "Wife," he said, "what were you doing in my orchard?" Reminding it. Of what? Of what it is for. He reached for her. She came to him. She sat on the arm of his chair and laid her head against his hair, and she felt, through the completed mark at her throat, the steady, patient heartbeat of the man she had married, and she felt, beneath her hand, the steady, patient rise and fall of his chest, and she thought, calmly, "This is the first morning of the rest of it." Crisara. "Yes, I want to name a child, someday, Corin." Her throat closed. She could not answer for a moment. She only nodded, with her head against his. "And I want to name a daughter," he said softly. "Lenora, if you will allow it." She turned her face into his shoulder. "Yes," she whispered. Outside the window in the orchard below the south tower, 3 apple blossoms turned slowly on a white thread, and the wind carried very faintly the last bars of a chant that had not been sung openly in the northern reaches in 80 years. The order of still waters had not ended after all. It had only been waiting for someone to remember it. And in the great bed of the South Tower of Ostermere, with her husband's hand closed around hers and her mother's ivory needle on the windowsill, and her own slow blood finally clean, Chrysara Thornweald closed her eyes and remembered one more time, and then let herself, at last, rest.